Big 12 radio. It's Big 12 today. And our Modelo Spring Caravan rolls along to Provo. Where's that truck? Thank you. Modelo Spring football, earned, not given, James. Let's talk BYU football because the full-time fan knows no off-season. Modelo's off-season optimism is
mandatory.
Thank you. Let's dig into BYU, and then we'll visit with Kalani Sitake, the football coach for the BYU Cougars. If you're just joining us, we've had 3 football coaches on today, but we're talking spring football about BYU. And, James, the Cougs have won 23 of their last 27 games in the last 2 seasons in the Big 12. Their first year in the Big 12 was forgettable, but the last 2 seasons have shown how strong that they can be. They've started spring practice already with a pro day on March 20th, and then their spring showcase will be on April 3rd. And big picture here, Bear Bachmeier's development. You know, Bear Bachmeier stepped in as a true freshman last year after spending spring in Provo in Palo Alto, California. Now he spends spring in Provo, getting ready for year 2 with Aaron Roderick. But it'll be almost an entirely new pass-catching operation for him with Parker Kingston, his expulsion from the team with some pretty heinous charges that have been levied against him. So they're kind of starting over from square one at wide receiver, but they do bring back a ton of players at a ton of important positions, especially on the defensive side of the football. James, what stands out to you big picture about BYU as they head into spring?
Big picture, there's no reason to believe this team won't be right back at the top of the Big 12 competing for a Big 12 title, even with the departure of Parker Kingston at wide receiver. This team went through a similar situation last year late in the process with their quarterback, an even more important position, and they were just fine. They do lose their top 3 pass catchers from last year. So Bear Bachmeier had all this experience around him. And now the guys that are catching passes from him, there are some familiar faces with his brother Tiger, with Hagan, who's a little lightning bug. But losing Kingston and Chase Roberts and your tight end Carson Ryan does hurt. But offensively, there's a lot to be excited about, especially up front with the offensive line. They bring back their center in Bruce Mitchell, and then they attacked the offensive line in the portal. And I think their portal class, by the way, is top 15 in the country, according to 24/7 composite ratings. But I think it gets overlooked because they didn't bring in this huge haul. They only brought in about a dozen guys. But the guys that they were very selective in who they recruited, and the transfers that they brought in up front is probably the most exciting part for me. Like they bring in Paki Finau, an offensive lineman from Washington, who they recruited aggressively out of high school. He was a 4-star recruit. He chose Washington over BYU and Auburn and Miami and Oregon. Played in all 12 games for Washington last year. Started 4 at left guard, had a solid pass blocking grade, played 229 pass blocking snaps. Like, they bring in experience. Then they bring in an offensive lineman from Utah State who was not a starter going into last season. Well, Utah State was getting clobbered by Texas A&M. They put him on the field, and he played really well. He earned the start the next week against Air Force, and he started the rest of the season. He's a guy that only allowed 3 sacks all season, just 1 sack over his last final 5 games. So that's kind of where I start, in the trenches on the offensive line, because that's one area I think they need to be better than they were last year, and I think they will be.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think that is without a doubt, aside from like the obvious Bear Bachmeier year 2, wide receiver, upheaval, offensive line is it. I mean, they brought in a ton, and we'll talk with Kalani Sitake about this. I mean, it's a good place to start to have your, all-everything center and Bruce Mitchell coming back. And there are certainly some guys that will be interesting in terms of trying to fill some holes and compete. I think, to your point, like, there's certainly some spots that are solidified, but they're going to have a lot of good competition amongst many of the spots on the offensive line, and I think that's huge. The other thing is Kelly Poppinga steps in as their new defensive coordinator, and they lose Jay Hill. He goes, with Kyle Whittingham to Michigan, and so Poppinga, who's been around, and I think the hiring of Poppinga, and we'll talk with Kalani about this, did a really good job to help to solidify many of their players that might have left to jump ship and join Jay Hill with Michigan. It says a lot about this program that they didn't really lose anybody on the defensive side of the ball despite losing their defensive coordinator.
Yeah, and by comparison, Utah lost a ton of guys
Yeah.
to Michigan. They went with Kyle Whittingham. Defensively, that's where they should be elite. Like, I love the linebacker from Cal. He was the number 1 rated linebacker transfer in the nation. He's from Utah, Cade Ulave. And then they add Jake Clifton, another linebacker who's from Kansas State, and started for K-State 2 years ago. Played in 19 career games, but then he went on a 1-year missions trip, so he wasn't on the field last year. He's returned from that missions trip, and he's going to be a player that I think is plug and play right away. They add a corner from Mississippi State, Javen Williams, who's 6'2", long-armed, looks a lot like Elijah Johnson, who is so good for them. And then, circling back, number one, Papinga stepping in, the defense doesn't change, in my opinion. I know Jay Hill was a very sought-after defensive coordinator, but all of these guys that are now kind of stepping up in their role learned from him. So the defense, I think, will look very similar. But at receiver, they add this kid from Oregon who's 6'6", 210 pounds, former 4-star, has contested catch ability, who transfers from Oregon, Kyler Casper. And then the 2 tight ends. I had 2 of the top 5 tight ends coming in this league, both headed to BYU, which just fits their system perfectly with what they try to do on the offensive side of the football.
Yeah, well said. And, one of the guys you haven't mentioned, but I know you brought him up in our top newcomers series, which would be their linebacker from Cal, Cade Ulave, 6'1", 235 pounds. One of the guys they do lose in the defense is Jack Kelly. He was, hugely important for them, and they're going to replace him with Ulave, and so their defense from a linebacker perspective shouldn't take much of a step back by adding Ulave, who's a big time add in the portal.
Yeah, he's their number 1 transfer. I mean, he's the number 1 rated linebacker in the nation coming out of the portal. So you pair him with Isaiah Glasker, who's back. Now, remember he battled some injuries late in the season. You add Jake Clifton, there's your 3. And then you still have Evan Johnson back in the secondary. Therian Alexander III is back. Tanu Voss is back on the defensive line. Like, this team, and then they added some guys, some beef up front on the defensive line as well in the portal as part of those dozen that they brought in. So it's the BYU way. They have a lot of player retention. They've got a lot of starters back. And then they piece together these really impactful transfers. And I can see why you're so high on them on paper as maybe being the favorite.
Yeah, they just return so much. But let's stick on the offensive side because, Bear Bachmeier was really good last year, except for the 2 games that he played against Texas Tech where he looked like a true freshman, especially in the Big 12 championship game. How much of a step can he take, will he take, especially when you consider the offensive line should be improved, but the wide receiver position is very much up in the air. But the running back is back, right? L.J. Martin, who was the Big 12's leading rusher, is back. So I feel like it's like, but this, but that. Like, receivers aren't there, but you get your running back. Well, your offensive line's better, but how much more improved will Bachmeier be in year 2?
Yeah, I see an uptick offensively at every position except wide receiver.
Yeah.
Because Parker Kingston was the guy that turned 6-7 yard catches into
6-7. Sorry. It's just now go ahead. Sorry.
You have to. I should have said 7 or 8 yard catches. Set you up for that one. But those shorter completions turn into really explosive plays. And if you look at Bear, his worst game of the year was probably the Big 12 championship. He was pressured every snap. The kid was just beat to pieces.
Yeah.
But then he goes out in their bowl game and destroys Georgia Tech. Threw for a career-high 325 yards, had a really high quarterback rating, was 27 of 38, and he put it up 38 times. Like, that shows me that he can pass the football 30, 35, 40 times, and BYU is capable of being a very explosive offense with him.
Yeah. Look, I think Bear was impressive enough throughout the season last year to wet your beak, and that, again, is a big reason why I like BYU as a favorite of the Big 12, despite what Texas Tech has added and how much talent they have. Texas Tech should probably win the Big 12, but I feel like going into the season, it'd be hard not to recognize BYU and what they bring back, and Bear Bachmeier is a big reason for that. He's going to have to take a big step forward and make up for the lack of continuity and consistency at the wide receiver position. Look, I look for his brother to have a big year this year. Tiger Bachmeier was kind of a complimentary piece at wide receiver last year. He's in a much bigger role this year. So I think he's a guy that could majorly step up in a big way. And then I really like the addition of Walker Lyons. I think this guy scratched the surface of his potential at USC at tight end. This is Ryder Lyons' older brother who's transferring in from USC and will be available this year. He's another guy that I'm expecting big things from in terms of guys that we don't know that could emerge as pass catchers.
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at Bears' best games last year were games in which the ground game opened up the passing game.
Yeah.
L.J. Martin in that running back kind of duo of Bear, who's very capable as a runner. Those were his best games passing the football at Iowa State when he threw for 307 and didn't have an interception and a couple of touchdowns in that 2-touchdown road win. At Colorado when he had the game-winning drive and had a clean sheet, didn't throw any interceptions, and had a couple of touchdowns. And that should still be there with a better offensive line, with L.J. Martin returning. But at receiver, it's not bleak by any means. Cody Hagan was only 16 months removed from his mission service when they kicked off their season, played a ton of snaps, and then got better as the year went along. And then the connection with his brother, you talk about chemistry, that's going to be there. JoJo Phillips is back, who they really like. He's 6'5", 210 pounds. His physical tools are NFL ready, and he's going to be on the field a ton. And then you factor in two elite tight ends, the passing game's going to be fine. I really think that they're going to be okay. It's can they get more explosive plays via the passing game, and that's where I look at Kyler Casper, the 6'6" transfer from Oregon, whose dad played in the NFL for 8 seasons. He played in 23 games at Oregon. Now, he dealt with some foot injuries the last 2 years that kept him off the field at times, but when he's out there, he's a matchup nightmare.
All right, let's hear from that coach. Kalani Sitake joins us as our road trip around the Big 12 continues. We're talking BYU football in our Modelo Spring Tour as the spring caravan rolls through Provo. Modelo Spring Football, earned, not given, because the full-time fan with Modelo knows no off-season. Along with James Westling, I'm Ari Tepke. Kalani Sitake is next. This is Big 12 Today on Big 12 Radio, presented by Modelo, heard on TuneIn, watched on Big 12 Studios.